Right, so we can see draw phylogeny, which is a study of relationships. You have evolutionary relationships between different organisms, in this case primates. So we have chimps and humans closely related. Further down, gorillas, then orangutans, these things called gibbons, and then old world monkeys. So there you have a little comparison. If you go to LA Zoo, there's a great, I love their orangutan exhibit. So this idea of natural classification, hopefully if you do it right, you can predict characteristics. And you classify from kingdom down to species. And what we can use are dichotomous keys to help classify organisms. We're going to make one of those ourselves pretty soon. Fun lab or activity. And since everything evolves from a common ancestor, they tend to share characteristics like we share with primates. Our binocular vision, color vision, opposable thumbs, among others. And we can make predictions about what new species like. So what you need to understand how to classify, remember, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Make sure you know those. King Philip came over for good sandwiches. Whatever you have to do to memorize that, do it. Mnemonic devices work well. And kind of going through here, gray wolf. Animals, chordates, they have backbones. Mammals, they regulate their temperature, which is all similar to humans. Humans have all of these. Then we start to differ. Okay, we would be in primates, we would be hominidae, we would be Homo sapiens, but carnivora, canidae for dogs. Hyenas are also classified this way, and then canis lupus. Your house dog would be familiaris. Okay, and then we got the date palm. You don't see that around here, but plants, angiosperms, meaning they make flowers. Monocots. Which category, we'll study that later in topic 9, but this has to do with the structure in evolutionary history. They're palms, and then I'm really not too sure about these. I can't give you more information. I wish I could. So you should be able to identify bryophytes, filicinophytes, coniferophytes, and angiospermophytes. Bryophytes, you've heard of moss before, I'm sure. Usually growing on the north side of the buildings, but not always. It's wherever it's cool and moist. Usually that's the north side. It gets less sun exposure, cooler. Liverworts and hornworts, something you're not really familiar with. I'm going to give you a picture of that, or you can look it up. Filicinophytes, I think of the F, and I think of ferns. Okay, ferns, you've seen those. They have these leaves, and let's see, draw some of these leaves, and then underneath these leaves, you'll have these little dots. They're not yellow, but they're usually dark. And these little dots are called spores. We'll get to that. Pine trees are conifers, have a pine cone, needles. And angiosperms are plants that have flowers. Oops. Flowers. Which they are the most successful plant on Earth because those flowers give them lots of advantages that are key for survival, reproduction, being able to switch their genes around, evolve. So these bryophytes, they have something called spores. They don't have roots, so they're not embedded into the ground. And some have stem and leaves, but not all of them. Ferns, like I mentioned before, have these things called spores, which they help to reproduce. And conifers, root, stems, needle-like leaves. Needle. And seeds they hold on in cones. Like I mentioned before, flowering plants. Let's make something nice here. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Got the purple. Like my flower, this would be angiosperms. Make that nice flower. Flowers. Okay, flowers. Ovaries, kind of that's the egg, and the anthers, they have the sperm. So each flower has both the female gamete and then male gamete and the female gamete. But they like to switch one flower to another from two different plants. Still, you don't want to self-pollinate. You don't get the switching. You don't get the genes to mix up and create new combinations. So bilaterally symmetric out of all of these basic animal groups, platyhelminthes are, annelida are, mollusca, arthropods, and chordata. So most of them radial, that's just the cnidarians. Cnidaria. Not symmetrical. Guess which one? Porifera. No real symmetry at all. Just a sponge, a mass. We have a sponge back in the room. Check it out. Jointed appendages. Insects. Which one would insects be? Let's see here. Oh, arthropods. So, spiders have jointed legs. Grasshoppers. Arthropods and chordata. We have jointed appendages. And filter feeders, the only one is the porifera. So porifera are kind of unique in here. They got some very basic structures and feeding strategies. So no mouth, and no anus either. No symmetry. Ooh. And many pores, many holes. That's why we can use them to soak up water, put them in all those holes. Mouth and anus, cnidarian is radial symmetry. Soft body, you'll see calcium carbonate. If you go to the East Coast, especially Florida, not much more on the East Coast, but the land is all calcium carbonate underneath because it was underwater at one time. And all these shells grew and then died, the organism, and then built up these layers over millions of years and created this rock made of limestone, and that's calcium carbonate. So you've probably heard of limestone, you may have before, but that's like a natural rock. It came from living things. Pretty fascinating. Flatworms, platyhelminthes, that's Latin for flat. I don't know what helminthes is, but I'll find out. Mouth and anus, in one end, out the other, bilateral symmetry. Bilateral. Soft body, no blood system or gas exchange system. They're small enough, they don't need to have lungs or gills or anything like that. They just get right through their body. This is where it gets interesting, the annelids. Internal cavities, compartments with fluid under pressure. And there's ring segments, the bristles, and have blood vessels. So these are all really critical things that we see in our cells. We have ourselves the thoracic cavity with our heart and lungs, and then the abdominal cavity, and we inherit that from the annelids. So an earthworm, something so simple, we inherit those cavities, the increasing specialization of the tissues, especially like blood vessels. That's huge. Earthworms have 10 little hearts that are like basically thickened vessels to help pump that blood around. I'm always fascinated. What we used to dissect earthworms and just see how complicated they are on the inside, how similar they are to us. It's a great lesson in evolution and comparative anatomy. Mollusks. So some of you may have eaten clams. Those are bivalves. Mouth anus. Most have shells, but as you know, squid and octopi don't. There should be a comma there. The mantle is right underneath that, secretes the calcium carbonate. Had this really cool structure called a radula. It's like this little nub. It's kind of this round thing. And then on the end, see what all green, it's got all these little dots, all these little nubs, these little rough, like little teeth. And it basically just scrapes the food and breaks it apart. All right, that's what we see in all of them. And then we got the insects. The external skeleton is made of chitin, and there's joints between appendages. So we have these vertebrates. Let's list them. You'll see them on page, this is 268. So I'm going from bony fish. There are 30,000 species. Then birds. And I think it's reptiles, amphibians, and then mammals, which we belong to. How many species of birds? 10,000. And I think there's 9,000 reptiles. Sorry, get it kind of 9,000. 6,000 amphibians. 5,700. So it's really interesting when you look at this. In order to speciate, turn into, develop all these different species, well, one thing is you need time. You need time in a changing environment, different habitats for all these different species to arise. And we see bony fish have the most by far species. And guess where life began? In the oceans. So they've been in the ocean a long time, so they've had plenty of time for the mutations to build up, for the adaptations to slightly different conditions, different food sources, through all of the different extinction events. Although I think like two. So 700 million years bony fishes have been around. Birds, about 350 million years. Reptiles, about 300 million years. Remember, birds have been around with dinosaurs. Then I'm not sure about, I'm going to go check for these other ones. But they're a lot younger. So as you get these younger and younger species, you have fewer numbers of species. So basically on your paper, younger organisms have fewer species, younger categories. And where this is on page, same page, 268. 6.8, where you want to be able to, if you see something and describes an organism with gills, you should associate that with bony fish. If you see something about skin with feathers, you should associate that with birds. Lungs with extensive folding, scales with keratin, you should associate with reptiles. Pentadactyl means 5 fingers. How many fingers do you have? 5. So this is used a lot in nature. This evolved to do a bunch of different things.